All right, guys, we're back, and today we're talking about the Stamp Act of 1765. The British have begun to interfere a little bit more, right? We've seen them leave troops within the colonies after the 7 Years' War. We've also seen them pass the Proclamation of 1763. If you don't know what that is, I've got a video on that as well. But this is a little bit different. It's going to feel a little bit more intrusive. It's going to hurt a little bit more. So basically what happens is that in order to make American colonies more profitable, they're going to begin to raise taxes. Ultimately, that very costly, and you're going to get tired of hearing this refrain from me on all these different acts, but the reality is they needed to make the colonies more efficient, more profitable, because we were their cash cow. The cash cow they had recently fought a war over, and now they needed us to produce. So they're going to pass this Stamp Act in order to make sure that that happens. They need money very reliably, very efficiently flowing from the colonies into the royal coffers. So what they're going to do is they're going to pass this Stamp Act. Now, it's not a stamp the way we think of a stamp where you're mailing a letter for anybody that still does that, right? But it actually looks like this on screen. This is what the stamp looked like, or at least one version of it. And so the stamp is really just that. It's a stamp that they would put on paper using ink, but it was an official stamp. And it had, there were limited numbers of these stamps around. They were all given to royal officials who had jobs in regulating and whatnot. And the stamp cost money. So here's what you needed the stamp for, right? It forced these colonists to pay for a stamp on all paper products and all legal documents. Right? Now you might think, well, we don't use that much paper, and we don't today, but back then you had to have paper documentation for a lot of different things, right? And so here are a short list of the things that you had to have it for. If you wanted to buy or sell land and be recognized as the legal owner, land deeds had to have the stamp. Marriage certificates and license, wills, ship manifests. So if you were shipping goods to and from the colonies or Great Britain, if you were receiving them, every page of your manifest had to have that stamp on it to make it official. Any commercial contracts, if you were buying and selling large quantities or doing business deals, anything you wanted to be legally recognized had to have this stamp. Even newspapers and diplomas. So there were a lot of different things. It wasn't just the use of paper. It was all legal documents and things that you wanted to have legally recognized. And so what we're going to see is that citizens in England, and this is really important to note, they didn't have to pay the stamp tax. This was a tax that was only on the American colonists. Now, this is where things just blow up because people are furious. We're told that we are British citizens and that all British citizens are supposed to be equal. Now, we know that's not really true because they view us as subservient. They view us as second-class citizens, but that's what we're told. And now here we have taxes being levied on us that are not having to be paid by those that live in Great Britain. So that infuriates an awful lot of people because ultimately this act was debated and passed by Parliament without any input or any representation from the colonies. You've heard the term taxation without representation. Well, this is it. This isn't the only one, but it's a big one, right? Do you think that the people who live in large urban industrialized manufacturing cities like London and Liverpool and those that live in England might have different needs, different concerns than those who live in the American colonies, where so much of life is uncertain, where it's far more agrarian, where there's little manufacturing, where they're having to settle wild lands and tame wilderness areas, where they're having to look after themselves against Native American attack and that sort of thing. My guess is that life in England was very different than life in the colonies. And the people in the colonies, they wanted representation. They wanted people who knew what it was like to live in the colonies to represent their interests. Because without representation, it meant that taxes could just be levied again and again and again, and we have no recourse. We have no way of combating that. So it's not just the taxes, although it is, right, in big part. It's also that lack of representation. So the taxes are really going to affect everybody. You'll hear people talk about the fact that, well, it was the wealthy that were affected. It was. We're not going to debate that, right? It was. The wealthy were incredibly affected. more so than others, but it trickled down. Everybody was affected. If you want to get married and have that marriage legally recognized, then you need the stamp. If you're purchasing goods, and remember, because of the mercantilist policies, we can only buy manufactured goods from Great Britain, the price of those goods just went up. While you may not be the one that's importing them, the tax is passed. If the cost of doing business goes up, the cost of the product goes up. So our cost of living is being raised by these taxes. With every good that we buy, we're paying more in order to allow those merchants to pay for that tax. So it affects everyone, but it does affect the wealthy the most because they're the ones that have a greater need for legal documents. And because they were angry and oftentimes they were influential, they had the ability to then stir up the anger and point out the injustice to the masses. So now not only do you have an angry upper class in America, angry wealthy people, but you have angry wealthy people who are being supported now by angry mobs of people who see this as unjust. Not just on behalf of the wealthy, but on behalf of themselves as well. Who's representing our needs, right? Why do we pay taxes that those in Great Britain don't? Who's speaking for us? So this is the first in a long line of laws that get passed. Or no, I shouldn't say the first. It's the first tax that really has a bite to it, that feels unjust. And so there will be others. To learn about those, go ahead and subscribe to my page. I'm putting new content out several times a week, and I want to be able to push that out to you. We're going to talk about the Quartering Act. We're going to talk about the Intolerable Acts and the massacre and the Tea Party and all that kind of stuff. So go ahead and join us for that, guys. Thanks for watching. I hope you're learning something about U.S. history.